Hi guys, welcome back. In this video, we'll be looking at quadratic equations. That's the introduction to quadratic equation and all what you need to know about quadratic equation. Now, quadratic equations, unlike your linear equation, are equations who has its highest power to be 2. That means the highest power of the unknown should be 2. When the highest power of the unknown is 1, it's linear. When the highest power is 2, it is quadratic. When it's 3, it's something else entirely. Now, we can represent a quadratic equation in this form: ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, where a is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is a constant. So any quadratic equation that obey this rule, provided that a is not equal to 0, is a quadratic equation. Because the moment a becomes 0, you can either have a bx plus c to be equal to 0, or a bx to be equal to 0, or a c to be equal to 0. So, okay, c to be equal to 0 does not actually make any sense. But you can have bx to be equal to 0. This is linear. You can have bx plus c to be equal to 0. This is also linear. Now that we said that, it means that for every time we have a quadratic equation, you must have a coefficient of x squared, making it quadratic. So whenever you see a question and the highest power is the unknown raised to the power of 2, we call it quadratic equation. Now, a quadratic equation can be solved using three methods. We'll be looking at them separately. You have your factorization method, which we'll look at in our next video. You have your formula method, which most of you refer to as the almighty formula. There's nothing mighty about that formula. Then lastly, you have your completing the square method. That's a systematic way of getting quadratic equation answer. And you should note that for your factorization method, not all quadratic equations or not all quadratic expressions can be factorized, but all quadratic equations can be solved using completing the square method and using the formula method. And even the formula you use in formula method is gotten by using completing the square method. Now, when solving quadratic equation, you might come across questions looking like this, or like this. How do you go about them? How do you tackle such questions? Now, let's start with x minus a, x minus b to be equal to 0. You have x minus a, x minus b to be equal to 0. So what this simply means is that the product of two numbers is equal to 0. Now, for the product of two numbers to be equal to 0, one of the numbers has to be 0. So it's only when 0 multiplies a number, that's when you have product to be 0. If none of these guys is 0, the product can never be 0. So right, it is either x minus a is equal to 0 or x minus b is equal to 0. Now, x will be equal to a or x will be equal to b. So this is how you approach question whenever you have the product of two numbers to be equal to 0. Note that this does not hold when the value here is not 0. That means if you have x minus a, x minus b to be equal to 2, you can't write x minus a is equal to 2 or x minus b is equal to 2. It's very wrong. But for a product of two numbers to be equal to 2, the two don't necessarily have to be 2. So it makes no sense. So this is only valid when the product of two numbers is equal to 0. Now for the other guy here, you have x squared to be equal to 9, x squared to be equal to 9. As most of you know, you can solve this guy by looking for the square root of 9. So x here will be equal to the square root of 9. Now you should know that the square root of a positive number gives you two values, which is positive and negative. So the square root of 9 will give you a positive or negative root of 9. And what is the root of 9? The root of 9 is 3. So your answer is plus or minus 3. So you can see when looking for the square root of 9, because the highest power here is 2, the answer you are having is two possible answers. Now for quadratic equation, you can have at most two possible answers. There are cases where you have just one answer. So we'll look at that before we round up this class. So you can also have one answer, but in this case, we're having two possible answers, which is what? Plus or minus 3. Now, the next one that we'll be looking at is a question that most students will normally make mistake when solving. You have x squared to be equal to 4x. It is very wrong to divide through by x. It is very wrong to divide through by x. So rather, if I use x here, one of these x will cancel one of these x is equal to 4. This is a correct answer, but this is not the only possible answer. So the best way to solve, or the right way to solve this question, is to move both of them to the same side of the equality sign. So your x squared is equal to 4x, Move your 4x to join your x squared. So this will give us x squared minus 4x to be equal to 0. So I can factor out x from here. This is x into x minus 4 to be equal to 0. Though I'm factorizing, this is not what you are going to be doing in factorization method. In factorization method, your equation will exist in this form. So you have to factorize the equation in this form, not an equation just having ax squared plus bs. It is easy to factorize ax squared plus bs, but it's quite complicated to factorize ax squared plus bs plus c. So in our next video, you will understand what I'm talking about. So in this case now, I'm having the product of two numbers to be equal to 0. So x multiply x minus 4 is equal to 0. It is either s is equal to 0 or s minus 4 is equal to 0. So s is equal to 0 or s is equal to 4. So if x is 0, this will be 0 and this will be 0, which is very correct. If x is 4, 4 squared here is 16, 4 times 4 is 16, which is also very correct. Now, I told you guys that there are cases whereby you can have only one answer when dealing with quadratic equation. So example is when you have a question like this: x minus 2 multiplying x minus 2 to be equal to 0. Product of two numbers equal to 0. So I can easily say x minus 2 is equal to 0 or x minus 2 is equal to 0. So s is equal to 2 or s is equal to 2. So as you can see, it has only one answer, and that answer is s is equal to 2. So another way to cut this long cut here is to write here x minus 2 multiply x minus 2 is like 5 multiply 5, which is 5 squared. So I can write here this is x minus 2 or raised to the power of 2, which is equal to 0. So if I look for the square root of both sides, the square root of 0 is 0. There's nothing like positive 0 or negative 0. 0 is a neutral value. It's neither positive nor negative. So look for the square root of both sides. So x minus 2 will be equal to 0. So therefore, s will be equal to 2. So that's the answer to the question. So these are the ways you approach simple quadratic equations. In our next video, we'll be looking at factorization method, then formula method, and lastly, complete square method. Thanks for watching. If you find this video helpful, use the like button, use the comment section, and also don't forget to subscribe and share to friends. Thanks for watching once more. See you guys in the next video.